Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm here with Ron Eccles, and I've asked Ron to join us on our podcast as a regular personality, regular guest. I think his insight and his knowledge when it comes to business and investing, when it comes to life and faith, right, is at the top, one of the top levels of the world. And so I've asked Ron to come on and be an educational director, be a content director, but really be a thought leader within our thought leadership relationship with our tribe. And so you guys are going to interact and see him a lot. And so Ron, I want to bring you on the podcast today, and let's talk about some stuff, right? And let's talk about, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about, but let's talk about some stuff. Let's stuff some stuff into some stuff to do some stuff.
It is really easy for me because I spend more time asking questions in my own life, and then I look for answers. And so I'm always in a process of learning, and I believe that that's really what really makes the people like you and people I've met over the years successful, is you never stop pushing the envelope in your own lives. When you wrote this book, Money Shackles, now I've been digging into chapter 1, really kind of figuring out, why did you write this book? What is it about? Who's it for? And it's so obvious. But it's obvious to people maybe like me, I'm 64 years old, and I've read thousands of books and listened to hundreds of thousands of hours of training and stuff like that. And people like you have probably done the same. But there's so much information packed into here. I think we need to actually begin to slow down, open up a little bit, and help people, because that's what your book is about. It's about empowering people.
I mean, asking me why I wrote it, I think there's a million reasons why I wrote it. I think one of the reasons, when I look at the short period of time that I've been able to completely break free financially, the short period of time I've been able, and I say short period of time, a decade plus, but in the proverbial sense, right, I look at, like, my father-in-law is a great example, right? And he's a man who's worked really hard, and I feel like in a lot of ways, he's broken some of the money shackles over the years, but he's 70 years old, and in order to get to true financial freedom, and I look at him, and as I began buying houses and began making debt work for me, and allowing debt to be the compounding effect that accelerated my wealth, right, it was very frustrating for him that I didn't own my own home, right? And what I mean is I owned 10 rental properties before I owned my own home. And my belief was it was easier for me to buy a rental property and be able to utilize the appreciation, utilize the compounding effect, utilize equity built into those rental properties, than to also go and buy another rental property, right? And to be able to utilize other people's money and be able to utilize other people's efforts, right, to buy more rental properties. And as I started this compounding effect, right, in the very beginning, it seems slow, right? But the amazing part, if nobody's ever spent time on a spreadsheet and explored compound interest, right? And that sounds very nerdy, right? And so there's parts of me that is very nerdy, but the way money accelerates, and it's a weird dynamic unless you've ever done it, because once you've done it, you're like, okay, I get it, and every time you see it, you're like, I get it. And there's something about the compounding effect with interest, and it comes year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, right? There's just kind of like this explosion on the cycle of money, or the cycle of effort, or the cycle of energy, right? And I think everything compounds. And so for me, allowing debt to be a useful tool versus this guilt-ridden thing that a lot of people have, or this thing that they want to stay away from, right? Like the Bible says, don't be a slave to the lender, right? I don't think the Bible says don't make the lender work for you, right? And those are two very, very, very different concepts. And so for me, I allowed leverage, or I allowed the ability to make money work for me, allow debt to work for me, right, to compound my wealth. And so for me, Money Shackles was this kind of conversation that comes back to, well, childhood where my parents didn't understand money, and they knew how to make money, but they also knew how to lose it. And they made money, lost money, made money, lost money more times than most people can imagine in a lifetime. I could go from a luxurious few moments, right, in childhood, to a few months later figuring out, how I was going to heat up water to wash myself, right? And so I went through those cycles constantly, in and out, moving, felt like every 6 to 12 months, right? My brother and I, Dory and I, we were counting to see who lived in more places before we were 22 years old, right? Me, it was 33 places I lived before I was 22 years old. And so, for me, it's something, from childhood, and then, that gap, and figuring out, what created this wealth, not only just for me, but has also created the wealth for all of our investors, right? Because it's one thing to say, hey, I did it, and let me go write about how I did it, but that's not enough, right? And so I did it, and then we've done it for thousands and thousands of investors, right? And so by helping them do it, now it seems to make sense that like we got to take it to a greater mission. There's a greater calling behind it. And so Money Shackles is really about the handcuffs that society ties people in, right? And a lot of people don't talk about it. People don't understand that there is people in this world that are dark and dangerous. And what I'm talking about is the country of China has a 2040 plan, if you've never looked it up, to overthrow capitalism. And they want Americans to hate Americans as much as anything in the world. And they want to destroy capitalism. And so for me, I felt a calling that, hey, every American can succeed financially. There's rules, and there's a way to play the game and play the system that you can beat the game and you can beat the system, right? And if you allow destabilization of currency, or you allow the different things that are out there to erode your belief in our country, or erode your belief in our financial system, that's what they want. So if you're sitting there right now and you're an American and you're like, I don't trust the financial system, that's what they want. If you're sitting there right now and you hate the opposite side of the political aisle, like hate them, like passionately, like want, if you're someone right now and you have one or two beliefs, it's a little polarizing. If you're sitting right now and you're saying, take Trump's ass to jail, right? Or you're sitting on the other side, right? Like, we will fight for Trump's freedom, and we will stand on this ground, and we will die on this ground to fight for his freedom, right? That's what they want, right? And the reality is we have to come together, because otherwise you won't succeed. But the reality is I can't control politics, but I can control my finances. I can control the finances of investors who invest with us, and I can control the ability to spread a message, right, of the tools that can help people break free. And so I can never control politics. I can never control the things that happen, worldwide. So what I do is I say, well, what is the impact that I can make? And to me, the Money Shackles is that handcuffing of individuals who are trained by institutions and by a system that doesn't work. But within America, there is freedom. And so this freedom is like, there is this path, right, that you can weave and be completely free, right? And so Money Shackles is something for me is a lot of passion, because I've been with thought leaders, around thought leaders, a thought leader, right, pretty much since I was about 25 years old, and I'm 43, so about 18 years that I started that journey. And for me, it took me about 10 years to fully break financially free. And that goes from somebody like didn't understand credit, had card repoed, right, when I was younger, right? There's no way when I first started making money I knew how to buy a house, right, correctly. It was easier for me to buy a rental property than it was to buy my own first house, just as far as the process and the system, right? So, I mean, Money Shackles, there's just so many pieces to it. And then there's this whole new industry, right? Because of the Jobs Act, because of 2012. And there's this whole new industry of investments that exists that didn't exist 20 years ago. Didn't exist, was non-existent, right? Public companies that are non-traded, right? Public companies that aren't on the stock market, where people can know that they're audited, know that they go through rigmarole, but at the same time, they're not on the stock market. And so there's a way to almost be a venture capitalist or angel investor, or they were only accessible in private companies to the accredited. And so available to everyone. And so for me, there's a lot of different things that kind of come to the perfect storm to say like this is a great time to open this path to people.
Yeah, I love in the book that you talk about the American dream, and I'm going to put it in my words. I think it's about reestablishing the possibility of what the American dream could really be again. And I think you and I both seen people that will come into this country legally, immigrants, have a 4 times higher chance of becoming a multimillionaire or a millionaire in this country than a native-born American, because of the system you described just a moment ago, and you also described in the book. I was part of that system. Hey, go to school, whoever gets the most education, gets the best job, makes the most amount of money, wins. And it means those people who don't get the most education, have the lower paying jobs, they lose. And that was a system, I believe, created for very, very wealthy people. But you just described the new dynamic in there. I say an old dynamic most people didn't realize. There are other dark forces now that are playing the American people against one another to keep them in bondage for an even worse or worse outcome than that. So here we have the availability. Like back when I was younger, that the information you're talking about, that you put in this book, that you've been living out, and RADD was created for, that information was hidden from people like me. And now it's available everywhere. But the problem is, and I'm going to go back to a quote that I heard in 1982 when I was in chiropractic college. I went to a seminar and heard this guy say this: America has no lack of opportunity. It has lack of opportunity seekers. In a time when we have so much knowledge available to us.
I don't know, man. I think I disagree with that. Like, I think America has an endless supply of opportunity seekers, right? I think the average American wants to live a certain life, right? And you can call it their American dream. And I think Americans are seeking, possibility at all times. I think Americans have a very open mind. I think it's one of the beautiful parts about Americans in general is we have very open, right, to possibility, right? And yes, we have our fundamental beliefs, and yes, we have things that are important to us. But I think Americans are very open, right? They're open to believing in vehicles, right, that can exist for success, right? The whole side hustle coin, right? I don't know if that exists anywhere else in the world other than in America, right? And side hustle is a beautiful thing because the compounding effect of side hustle, given a few years, given 5 years, 7 years, right, makes a massive difference. I think the interesting part is, like, I'm not anti-education, right? Education was good for me. Living on my own at 16, I actually needed my college years to grow up a little bit. I needed my college years to be able to mature and go through some things I couldn't go through because you're living on your own, working 40 hours a week, playing sports and those kind of things. So I needed that time. So I'm not anti-education, but I am anti, right, bad training. And the bad training, right, is not teaching people about being set free, right? And immigrants come into America and they want to be set free, right? To me, and this is probably a little controversial, right? Because it's not a left-right view when it comes to immigration, right? I think when I studied economics in business school, right, they talked about population, right, and population being one of the great capital resources in America, and the ability for immigration to be such a resource, right? But then as you go forward, right, the whole conversation comes about people coming in illegally and about people that come in that shouldn't be coming in and those kind of things. For me, well then, like, you can't just throw money at a problem to fix it, right? But to me, let's create the greatest system of immigration in the history of the world, right? Let's create a structured, specific, step-by-step path, right, where people can come in, right, and they can go into good, right, housing, where they can come in and they can receive education, maybe even learn English, and they can go through a step-by-step process, right? And even if it takes 6 months, right, or a year, right, for them to come into our country, but now they come into our country with a set of skills, with a set of tools, right? They come into our country as a process, and instead of as this anchored thing. And if we had the greatest immigration in the world, then we'd have one of the greatest assets in the world. And so for me, right, having married into a Hispanic family, with my wife, and my wife is I want to say second generation. I think her grandparents were immigrants, right, into the country. Maybe she's third generation. And but for me, as I married into that family, kind of what I realized is there's just a little bit different spirit to it, right? There's a little bit different pride in what this country is, and I know that if we instead of fighting about an issue, right, we decided what's the single best way to handle this issue, what's the greatest way to handle this problem, right, we could succeed with it. And that's not a political thing. That's just saying in any challenge, in any situation, what's the best possible solution. So when it comes to finance and money, I always take a look at it and I say, well, what's the best possible solution, in any scenario? And if there's not a best possible solution, right, I'll walk away from it and I'll go into the next path or the next opportunity, because there's endless paths and endless opportunity.
Yeah, I listened to one of your previous podcasts with Charlie Dombeck, which was fantastic. And I watched Charlie describe his 3 children, 2 daughters, and the youngest one, his son. And he said they're all successful, but his son saw something in the first 2. They went to college, got a degree, but when they got out, they had a hard time making enough money to pay back the debt they had incurred, because education is very expensive today. And so it goes to your point. He took a different path of entrepreneurism. So inside of the book, Money Shackles, you talk about these traps that people get caught in. We've described a couple of them, but what other ones can we help people to understand that if you just recognize it's a trap, then there's a solution for it?
Yeah, I think one of the traps that people fall into is they go and they really want to pursue investing in education, right? And they should. In the book over and over, I wrote about the knowledge journey, right? There are certain times that you need to trigger and activate on the knowledge journey. Some people are like, you need to be on the knowledge journey all the time. It's not something I necessarily agree with. Sometimes I like to shut the knowledge off, right? And I need to focus on implementation. I need to focus on action and growth and taking stuff that I've learned and applying it, right? And so I go in seasons, and I do everything in life in seasons. For me, one of those traps though is like they hear all the time. The moment you start getting investment education, right? They start saying invest 10% of your money, invest 10% of your money, right? And me, as a very contrary belief, if you're not making a whole lot of money yet, if you haven't created the gap, right? And there's just this money gap, right? So there's how much money you make, right? There's expenses, right? And in the middle, there's lifestyle. And so the margin percentage between, right, income and, right, expenses and lifestyle, right? That margin is anything that's left, right, allows you to put it to work. And it's a choice of what you're going to put to work, right? And how much you're going to put to work or where you're going to put it to work. To me, for most people, when they're first beginning, if they're at the start of this, right, take that first money, do not invest it, right? And I would maybe you do save some for an emergency, right? But for me, you take that first money and you invest into yourself as a human being, right? Invest into yourself. I don't think there's any greater investment in life you will ever make than the personal investment into oneself, right? I'm not talking about something where I've seen people who become addicted, right, to education and they never implement anything. But at the same time, I think that if you take that first amount of money, you expand your ability to earn more money. And you expand your ability, right, to make a greater return on your investments, right? If you just follow the system and you only invest in the stock market, you only invest in mutual funds, or you only invest in certain things, right, you will ride the Wall Street roller coaster, right? It should be the greatest, right? 10 diamond, right? And if you go skiing, they say double black diamond is or triple black diamond is it double black diamond? I think double black diamond is the worst, most dangerous skiing you could go down to, right? Well, to me, Wall Street's like the 10 black diamonds, right? It's the wildest ride you could ever have. And so there are other paths and other ways, and there's diversification. And so for me, if they don't have that knowledge, then it's like they're playing with fire, right? And for a person who can swallow fire, or a person who's like, one of those guys with the rings and they do the fire, right? To them, it's easy for them to handle the fire because they have the knowledge and because they have the practice and the experience to go be successful with it. As a normal American, if you're not ready to handle the fire, you're not ready to handle the fire, right? And so they have to get the knowledge and invest in themselves as a person and expand your ability to earn, right? Because over the years, everything has a compounding effect. And so on the income side, right, versus the expense side, right, if you can control either one of these variables and you can just increase your income by 10% and maintain this, right, as a consistent, right, now you've created this bigger gap. Now you have more to put to work. And a lot of people, a lot of traditional educators, right, investing may disagree with me on that. But I think here's the thing is if you want to wait till you're 70, right, or 80 years old to start achieving financial freedom, and I have had investors who started later in life, post-retirement, and invested with us and succeeded and found that they could maintain lifestyle. But if you want to wait that long to start creating the freedom that you want, then you're waiting for life to create freedom. And I don't ever want to wait to create freedom. I think most Americans deserve freedom now.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about on the previous podcast was when is the best time to act. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're listening to us right now, Dutch, how urgent is a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being the most important thing, how important is it to take action once you realize that there's an opportunity for you that can change everything?
Yeah, for me, there's immediate steps that any person can take at all times, right? And I think the first thing is just the decision. I've decided I'm going to pursue financial freedom. I've decided I'm going to pursue a greater expectation of what wealth looks like for me and my family. And making that decision is a now decision. waiting, and you look at life 5 years from now, it's only gonna get worse. It's only gonna get harder, right? So the question is what do you do now to make it easier, and what are the actions that you can do now to make it easier? So I always think that's really really important.
And that goes back to your concept of compounding, right? The first thing is get clear, know what you want, then make the decision to take action on it. And one of the things I struggled with throughout my life, I still do now, because I love information. So I spend 2 to 4 hours every day pouring into me and learning more. But what I've had to learn, and it's sometimes really painful for people like me, is that to invert that 80-20 rule, where 80% of my time was spent consuming information, 20% was taking action on it. Whereas I now work at reversing that to where I would consume 20% and act 80% of the time. And I watch you and I watch Amy, and you guys are get that perfect balance of seeing, learning, and then taking massive action towards that.
I mean, but one of my favorite quotes, right? And I can't accredit this to anybody. I believe it is a Dutch quote, right? And that is my true belief, right? Ignorance on fire makes more money than knowledge on ice.
Yeah.
And reality is, yes, you got to go obtain the knowledge, but being on fire, right, is important, right? And I'm more talking about not with investing, right? Ignorance on fire with investing is not where that quote came from, to be crystal clear with everybody, right? It came from the expanding your income, right? And working to expand your income and growing your ability to enter into a world of unknown, right? It's one of the hardest things for any entrepreneur to do, is to move into a world of unknown. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to move into a world of unknown, because the game is changing for you in your life. And so you're going to go into what we call the wasteland when you move into the unknown. And that wasteland is just trying to figure out, you don't know your head from your ass hardly, right? It's like, who do you trust? Who do you not trust? What information is right? What information is wrong? Do I go in direction A versus direction B? What is, now we go back and we talk about in the book, the decision matrix, and how you make a lot of those decisions when you're in the wasteland, because you're not taught how to make effective critical decision making, right? When we're growing up, like there's nothing in school that says, here's how you do critical decision making. Just like there's nothing in school when you're growing up, like here's financial A, B, C, Ds. Here's what a credit score is, right? Nobody in school says, probably at 18 years old, you shouldn't take out a car loan, right? For a bad used car, right? Nobody tells you those kind of things, because, and then pay 20% interest, right? Because that's what the kind of loans that an 18-year-old gets on a bad used car. And so nobody teaches those things. So then people start falling into the trap early in life. And so then people try to go to school. Well, they may not know that all the financial aid, all the financial help that is out there for them. But when they go to school, they might also just take out loans. And as they take out loans, there's like this trap of I have to pay off this debt. And the faster you pay off the debt, the more successful you're going to be. That's just not factual, right? Taking your time, right, oftentimes to pay off debt, right, managing debt the correct way so that you can take your money and apply it to making a return is far more important. Because if let's say I have $100,000 in loan debt, and let's say I'm dedicated to paying off my student loans, and in the first 5 years I want to do everything in my power to pay off my student loans, and instead of taking your time, right, to pay off those loans, even deferring them or doing other things to reduce interest rates or for them to take time, you could have put away $100,000, went and bought your first house, went and bought 2 houses, right, with that amount of money, or even 3, right, depending on where in the country you are. Had that rental income working for you, allowed your student debt to be at the percentage that it is, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6% interest rate, right? And now the compounding effect, right, of real estate to override, right, the cost over here, right? And it comes back to the income versus expense scenario and lifestyle. And so when your debt's working for you, your income will compound. If you're focused on paying off all of your debt for a while, right, a long while, your expenses will compound. And so now you're in a place where you're not having anything left in the middle. And so allowing yourself to produce income and allowing your debt to be micro over here and minimize, right, the paying off of that debt while you're expanding the income increases the lifestyle. And what a lot of people don't understand is, like, real estate traditionally 5%, right, over 100 years appreciates, right, nationwide, is a pretty standard number. What people don't understand, year 1 it's 5%, right? But year 2 it's not actually 5% because you have a compounded effect, right? If let's say a home was worth $300,000, well, year 1 you're compounding 5% on 300,000. But then year two, you're compounding on 315,000, right? Year three, right now you're compounding like 331,500, right? Depending on how the return is working on for you. That's not perfect math, everybody. I don't have a calculator sitting in front of me. It's pretty close though.
You were straining me out for a little bit. What is it?
It's pretty close. But at the same time, right now you're compounding 330,000, right? And so now you're making more money. And so the whole point of financial freedom is, how do I get the most amount of money to work for me? Over here, let's say it's student loans. That debt, right, isn't changing. It's not changing. It's going to sit there, right? And you allow it to be paid off at the pace it's going to be paid off. But over here, if you're using debt correctly, right, the compounding effect of this is accelerating and it's expanding. And so as this expands, right, the gap between here and here grows. Yep. And as that grows, right, now you can start to achieve wealth. And so there is this margin. And it doesn't happen overnight, but the margin is huge for people to understand.
Yeah, one of the things in the book you are very adamant about, and that is how to create wealth, real wealth. And you just described something that I'm going to call it like you're the Steve Jobs of today. And Steve Jobs is famous for thinking outside the box, think differently.
I mean, I would never, ever try and compare myself, right, to Steve Jobs, right? I mean, one of the greatest geniuses, right, probably ever to be in our country. I think one of the things that I loved about Steve Jobs, he's absolute passion, right, for what he believed, and probably unparalleled. At one point in time, I think he had left Apple or was fired from Apple. I wish I knew the Steve Jobs story perfectly. There's a movie, I probably should watch it. But at the same time, but then he came back, right? But it was his passion that lifted up this company as an icon. But also I feel like for me in our industry, right, it's just the passion to I think the pain from things I experienced in my life, in my childhood, even when I was coaching college baseball. At that point, I would call that indentured servitude. And so for me, it's that reality of knowing what I've been able to achieve and others around me have been able to achieve. Now, how does someone else enter into access, right? How does someone else enter into that part of the club is whole point behind Money Shackles is expanding that belief for people, that understanding for people, but that actual result for people. And like for me, I hate and knowledge is great, right? But people attend courses, they'll read books, and they'll be like, "This is the greatest information. This is so awesome," right? But for me, that is good. But knowing the result, knowing the actual numerical number has changed, knowing that the finances have shifted, knowing the results, right, is more important to me, right, than people just feeling good. So it's more than the knowledge for sure.
Yeah. Well, the comparison I was making wasn't, obviously there's not a lot of people in this world that are.
I don't know. I butchered that answer about Steve Jobs. So that's all right.
No. Here's why I see the comparison. The comparison was Steve Jobs and Apple, and I've studied him a lot. It's all about thinking differently, looking at the same thing but thinking about it in a different way, and that's exactly who you are. I mean, you just described something, and again, you and I both had this conversation about the Dave Ramsey, the people in the Christian world who are being taught to be responsible with their finances, right? Because most people just spend more than they make and don't think about the consequences. But you just described a different way of looking at the same thing. If you could figure out how to leverage your time, your energy, and your income in a way that's wise versus the person who just says, well, I'm just going to pay off all my debt. You just inverted the thinking process for a lot of people right now. Because now people realize, well, I could literally work in a way that I'm compounding my results here, and this isn't really growing that fast enough. So my gap is getting better and better in my favor. That's a different way of thinking than most people that are listening to us right now have heard in their lifetime. So Money Shackles is going to really help open up a lot of people's eyes and see that there's a better way.
I mean, I agree. And, the alternative investing industry is something that's really not taught. It's something that's really not out there, right? And it went from an industry that didn't exist, right, in 2012 to 2023. It's a $1.8 billion industry. The RADD companies, we made up a large percentage of that last year, right? To think of an entire industry for us to make up, 3-4% of that industry, right, is pretty huge. I think it's an industry that's going to go into the trillions. I don't know how many times in the history of the world an industry has gone from nothing to billions to trillions, right, in 20, 30 years, but it has happened, right? It happened with the internet. It's happened in other industries. For me, that's kind of where alternative investing is going to, because I think Americans are hungry for something they can control, right? They're hungry for something that isn't shifted, right, by the winds of time, right? By when I mean by the winds of time, I just mean by like what the next thing that happened politically, right? Trump was indicted, right? Fed raises interest rates, right? All of these things are causing turbulation in the markets, and the stabilization of markets, I think, is valuable. But the government trying to stabilize markets, for me, is not my personal favorite, right? I am very much a big fan of free capitalism, right? I'm very much a fan that the markets and other things will correct themselves, right, effectively over time. But the challenge with that is, in today's world, right, is they have been corrected so many different times in so many different ways, that they don't naturally exist anymore the way they naturally existed before. And so I feel like taking money out of the stock market, right, and putting the money into public companies, right, not private companies, right? Bernie Madoff was a private company, right? There are other private companies that have done billion-dollar write-offs, right, in the last year, but public companies that have to expose their financials to the world, right? Public companies that have to, share their policies, their procedures, their processes, and keep transparency and keep realness is important. And so for me, I think there'll be so much money move from private equity and so much money move from the stock market that it'll make a massive difference in what they call the reggae industry, the crowdfunding industry. And the thing is, an investor can sit here and make, can take $100,000 and make 100 investments, or make 150 different investments if they choose to. And all of those investments, right, can compound and make a return, and they're not going to change daily. And I think that makes a huge difference and gives a huge window of opportunity for people.
I think what you just did, and I want to go back for just a minute, because there's going to be some people, it literally took me a few times listening to you on stage and talk about this alternative investing that you've created with RADD. I don't want anybody to miss this, because...
Well, I didn't create alternative investing with RADD, right? So what happened with RADD is we just pursued a path of financial success for investors, and to give more investors the ability to invest with us. And so what the DNA of the RADD story is, we had students who attended seminars, and I was very frustrated with not seeing more people buy deals, not seeing more people do real estate. And for me, I could sell education to the end of the time, but what's the point? If nobody makes money, if nobody does deals, it's an absolutely pointless venture, right? Like Robert Kiyosaki, right? One of the great thought leaders that people, I mean, I don't know anybody who hasn't read Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? Or doesn't talk about it. But the reality is like the Rich Dad Poor Dad seminars, right? Might have been great, but what percentage of those people actually did deals and actually made money, right? And that's not a cut on Robert. He had nothing to do with that whatsoever, right? That is just what the Rich Dad Poor Dad seminars were, right? And so for me, I look at that and I talk to our student. I said, well, explain this to me, right? I led you to water, right? You didn't drink. I created a great meal and you're not eating. Explain this to me. And they just came to me and they just said, hey, look, investing on our own felt perilous, right? All the fear, all of the challenges, all the expectations. And so, we opened our first RADD fund, right? For them to be able to invest with us and co-invest and be our partners. And so that's when we began investing with people. But then we very quickly realized there's all these different vehicles, investment vehicle. And there was only one vehicle that as I studied and I dove deep, that opened it up to all investors, right? Accredited, non-accredited. There was only one vehicle that I saw gave people public transparency. And for me, I look at my brother-in-law is a great example, right? He pursues real estate investment. His name is Vinny, and he pursues real estate investment, right? And I would look at him and I would watch some of the gurus. He would watch on YouTube or on different videos, and I'd be like, my gosh, Vinny, like, I was like, that guy's a scam artist. I can tell by what he's teaching, right? And I said, that one's teaching something from 15 years ago, right? and I want you to succeed, right? But I said, what gives us more credibility than any of our competition, right? Well, one, having public transparency about financials and books, right, gives us public transparency. But number two, success, right? It's one thing to say, hey, I flipped 10 deals, or one thing that says I flipped 100 deals, right? It's a different thing to have built a $200 million portfolio collectively with other investors. And so all of those things combined was the pursuit of RADD. And then I woke up and I said, wow, we're in this industry that's called the alternative investment industry, right? So it was an outside label. And then I started to explore what is the alternative investment industry. And I was like, man, this is pretty cool. I was like, this industry is freaking amazing. And there's other companies besides RADD that are absolutely incredible. And then I started to meet some amazing founders of other companies. And not only was I able to meet these other amazing founders of other companies, but I was able to synergize off them, mastermind with them, talk about the challenges, talk about how does government contracts impacting your business, right? Talk about how this is regulation impacting your business, right? Talk about, this recession and what's happening in this recession and what are you doing differently, or how are we adjusting, or how are we shifting in this industry, right? And then to be made, president of the Alternative Investment Association, right? Kind of blew my mind, but I think it was just my curiosity, like you were talking in the beginning, of all of these founders and just exploring and understanding our industry better, right, than anyone else. And that became really important to me, is have a deep understanding of our industry. Because for me, if you're going to succeed at anything, you should know it better than others. And that's always been a fundamental belief of mine. So we ended up in the alternative investment industry, and then we ended up being a leader in the alternative investment industry, and then we ended up being, I think, one of the great voices in our industry.
So you point back to the Jobs Act of 2012, that it opened the door for, let's say, I think it leveled the playing field, that allowed the average American to be able to invest in ways that only wealthier people were able to.
Yes.
And RADD now has capitalized on that particular market from a standpoint of saying, hey, we want many people to have the opportunity to invest and be part with us. And that's a tremendous turn in everything I've watched now for over 20 years. Most of the opportunities were for people who could muster the money, find the money, get enough money to start going into these things and eventually turn a profit from it. You're actually allowing people with RADD to be able to work their jobs, to do their passionate thing they're called to do, but then take their money and put it to work in a way that makes sense.
Well, real estate, as one example, has such a high barrier to entry, right? And there's the effort, there's the knowledge, and then there's the money to get into it. And so the challenge for a lot of people with real estate is like, they're looking at it and they're like, I don't have $100,000. I don't have $500,000. I don't have $3 million to do an apartment complex, right? The key in real estate within the alternative industry that I live in is the fractionalized ownership, right? The ability to take $500 or $1,000 and be an owner, right? To be a partner, right? Within a portfolio. But that's just how RADD does it, right? That's RADD's way, is the real estate way. But there's other companies that can do the exact same thing. You look at, there's stocks that are out there that are $300,000 stocks, right, to buy into, and so they made that very limiting, right, to who can join that. But now you're talking about, I've seen, healthcare apps, right, that help people, that they have an app where it reads their healthcare settings, and allows people to have notifications and help them, balance and figure out their rhythm. You can invest and be a partial owner in that company. I've seen orthopedics for all kinds of different, whether it's somebody who's lost a leg or lost a hand, right? That where they can help them rebuild, right? Or people that have had hip surgeries, and I've seen companies that are innovative and cutting edge, right, in that industry, or engines, right? One of the companies, Reggae's, that I saw recently, I did a interview with them. I'm trying to think of what their name is right now.
Modvans?
No. Modvans is a great
awesome
company too.
Yeah.
But this company, essentially, they build a different type of engine. And this engine, right, is something that our government and our military, right, have realized can be more effective, right? And so they've started putting money into this company to see it grow, and you could be an owner in that. But Modvans is super cool. Boxables is super cool. One of my team is holding up Liquid Piston, right? Is the company with the cool ass engines, right? And they were profitable, right, last year. And so to be able to invest in companies like that and help them expand this gap is huge. And it's really, what is the American dream, right? The American dream is business ownership. Well, now you don't have to figure out all the regulations. You don't have to buy all of the things. You don't have to undergo the pain in the butt, right? Hiring and all of those things can be, right? You can invest and be an owner in businesses. You can invest and be an owner in real estate. And to me, like, people always say, well, tell me, Dutch, what's important? I said, well, owning a business, all Americans, 100% of our Americans should own a business. If nothing else, just simply for the tax reasons. Number two, all Americans should own real estate, if nothing else, just simply for the tax reasons. Because the more money you put to work, right, the more effective it is. And when you start talking about taxes, it's the same gap, right? What's part of your expenses? Taxes, right? It's not a part of your income. It's a part of your expenses. And if you can reduce this at all, right, utilizing the tax code correctly, and I believe people should pay taxes, so I'm not out there saying people shouldn't pay taxes, right? But what I am saying is you should pay the right amount of taxes. And so if you can reduce this all by owning real estate or by owning a business, right, then, and there's a reason why the government does that. There's a reason why that's a part of the capitalistic system. Or by owning a business, right, you're helping the economy. By owning a business, by growing a business, you're employing people. By being a part of this equation, right, that should be a tax write-off, right? Because as a business owner, you're making a positive impact on the world. And so if you can reduce that tax liability at all, it makes a difference, right? Well, what is real estate? Well, a lot of people don't understand how important real estate is to the American economy. And so owning real estate makes a big difference. And I'll talk about some of that importance in a second, but then you reduce the liability. And so you create this bigger and bigger gap you can go and invest into. But if you look at the ghettos in America, right, where did they come from? Where were they created, right? Well, they were created by the money shackles in a lot of different ways. And some of it is racism, some of it is discrimination, right? Some of it is access to capital and access to money, right? And a lot of our inner cities and ghettos, cash markets appeared because there wasn't another way to buy property. And I mean cash, I mean in a bank, right? I'm not talking about the illegality of cash. What I'm talking about is they weren't able to get loans. And so not being able to get loans, it kept housing prices down. Well, keeping housing prices down isn't necessarily a good thing. And a lot of people don't fully understand this concept. When housing goes up in value, right, it creates work for everybody. And what happens is everybody who owns a house builds more wealth, and that money compounds. But in a cash marketplace, right, wealth doesn't compound within a housing market because appreciation won't happen nearly as effectively. And so these are the things that have, really shifted. And so if you look throughout America, right, where we have more minorities, right, in our inner cities or in our rougher areas, right, the inability to get the loans, right, created these cash markets. Well, one of the reasons we've seen so much value growth, right, in those areas, because the last 20 years, minorities, people in those neighborhoods have been able to get loans, but also the access to information and the internet, right, and being able to learn and understand what's accessible to them, not accessible to them. But one of the reasons properties can't improve or can't be grown, right? If you go into a neighborhood with boarded up properties, I guarantee you one thing exists financially, right? The cost of housing is too low. And that cost of housing doesn't equate to the cost of new construction or the cost to repair and build. And when the cost to repair and build is too high over what the price of housing is, nobody does it because there's no profit in it, right? Or they even lose money in order to do it. And that means we can only rely on the government to do it, and nobody wants to rely on the government to do stuff, right? Maybe that's just my own opinion. I believe in our own abilities to do things as people and Americans. So,
awesome. Well, one of the things, I don't know if we have enough time to unpack that today, but when it comes to, I want people to really focus in on these terms, alternative investing, because that is something I think is, as you just stated a little while ago, this is going to be $1 trillion industry. And again, RADD is one of the, we'll call leaders in that particular world. And you as now the president of the AIA, did I get that right? Alternative Investment Association, is going to be integrally involved in helping expand that. For the people listening right now, I hope you hear that by having fractional ownership, he just lowered the barrier of entry for everybody to be able to get on board and to own a piece of something that is growing and is going to continue to grow. Well, let's say hopefully going to continue to grow. We have no control over that, but except for the brilliance of you and Amy behind the wheel, steering the ship.
Lots of people.
Yeah. All right, the one other thing I'd like to get into, maybe in another one, but I just want to open up the door for it, is can people who've already built some retirement income in a form of an IRA or 401k, if they could have control of the 401k, are they eligible for something like this?
And the beautiful part about what they call the Regulation A industry, right, is they are qualified transactions. So IRAs, 401ks, and even when, last year or 2 years ago when they were talking about changing a lot of the rules, right, with that, they still would have been qualified. Now, a lot of those rules didn't change, which is, I think, good.
Thank God.
Right? A lot of those rules didn't change, but they're still qualified, right, even after if those rules would have changed. And so I think that's a great part of our industry is real estate is always, very much can be a qualified transaction done correctly. Yes, you have to follow the rules, right? Yes, you need to use a trustee, but I believe all of you should have your own check writing abilities out of your IRAs, right? I think you should have your own ability to invest your own money, and I don't think you should allow other people to control your money. It's always my opinion.
I'm with you 100%. All right, so maybe we should wrap it up there, and then maybe next time come back in and pick up on the different ways or other vehicles people have already available to them and how they can actually become part of a fractional ownership situation.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right.